in Rome. You know. Anybody else have an experience of having read it before, or? Hi. Oh. You can shout.
Hello?
There you go.
Yes, I'm a French teacher, so I read this when I was in university.
In the original, I imagine.
Really quickly,
yeah.
Trying to get through it. I read it since, and like you say, I've come to notice things that I hadn't before, and being an adult, you really appreciate a lot more. But my question for you is, I love when you talk about your Spanish teacher. I've heard you talk about her before, because I'm a French teacher, and I teach a lot of teenage boys. And I'm always trying to reach them, because French is not the best, you know, teenage boys don't necessarily love taking French class. And I'm wondering, do you think that this book may interest them in you know, very excerpted form, or maybe clips of the movie or anything? I've never thought about doing this at the high school level, but...
I do actually think that it would interest them. You know, I've talked about Beatriz quite a bit, and actually I found myself in this strange position last week. Beatriz Jimenez was my Spanish teacher from 7th grade through 11th grade. I went to a Jesuit high school in Miami, Belen Jesuit Preparatory School. Our claim to fame is that Castro went to our high school. The first thing he did was kick all the priests out, so they ended up in Miami and reopened the school. And it's an all-boys school. So all of us are the sons of Cuban parents, or at least when I was going there in the 80s. And Spanish was our first language. So we were studying Spanish the way we were studying English, both languages simultaneously. Beatriz was my teacher in 7th grade, and she has had a great impact in my life for a number of reasons. One was, I still remember lessons that she taught me, conjugating verbs from 7th grade. She said we remember it until the grave, and she was right. And I found myself in the strange position last week of she asked me for a recommendation for a job. And I could barely put the letter together because there's so much to extol that goes beyond what happens in a classroom with a teacher. She also taught me in 9th grade, she taught me in 11th grade, but one of the things that she was very passionate about was the arts. And so she used the classroom a great deal for us to sort of create projects based on what we were reading. And one of the first plays I did was I wrote a play about the life of Lorca, not knowing the first thing about Lorca, but because it was one of the things that we studied was bloodletting. So I got up and did a sort of biography of Lorca and acted out his life, including his unfortunate death. And this inspired her to put me in a play the following year where I played an old lady in a two-person play in Spanish that went on actually to win the first. I won the first acting award I ever got, was given to me by Jose Ferrer for that play, and then years later I won an award in his name. She would have us do these sort of festivals and things. Like we created a kind of Spanish language festival in the school. But I think the difference for you would be that this was our first language. And so another thing she did with novels, by the time we got to 11th grade, she used the Latin American short story. It's the best literature class I've ever taken. She used the Latin American short story, which was published in an anthology, from Romanticism through to Ultraísmo, which is a kind of, it's Borges basically. And she used that short story structure to teach us all the different literary movements from the 19th century through to the mid-20th. And then in the second half of the class, we studied all the poets of the generation of 1927 and the poets of 1898 and philosophers. And she had us teach the class by the end of the semester. So that was something that seriously engaged us, because when you're trying to express what you just read, you know, she wasn't necessarily picking stories that would, I think this is an exciting story for kids. For me it was. So that idea of riffing on a story or making plays about a story or coming up with parallels in life now off the Count of Monte Cristo, I think would be thrilling. Because the best thing that I think she ever did in terms of education was what we learned in class we used in our lives. You know? So if you can find a way to use the French, you know, and not just in the classroom setting, because we don't, my Spanish I use because everybody spoke Spanish at home, you know. So I do believe that. I think that this is a really fun book. And granted, the bigger book is a very rich experience, but the story in and of itself is a delicious plot. And there are so many cinematic versions of it too. And she would use film as well. television. You know, you're welcome.